Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Ha ha ha! Good evening, you're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 7. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 4 spine-chilling tales for you, all of them from author Michael Paige, about fearsome fires, fiendish friends, creepy copies, and near-death discoveries. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 terrifying tales. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show is about to begin. Our first tale tonight, from Michael Paige, introduces us to Noah, a gentleman who likes it hot. A little too hot, perhaps. And this time his bad habits are about to catch up to him. What will befall our arson-addicted protagonist? Stay tuned and find out. Without further ado, I present to you Hitchhiker's Haven. My name's Noah Riley, and I like to burn things. It had all started when I was 9, after my parents separated. Custody was granted to my mother, since my father had taken the opportunity to jump ship, probably to start a new family with the tart he had an affair with. It took my mother less than a year to catch another man's fancy, one that went from boyfriend to fiancé in record time. My new stepfather had no interest in children. The longer they were together, the more my mother's focus strayed away from her son to keep her new love plump and happy. Having no friends at school and no desire to be home, I often wandered aimlessly. I enjoyed finding anthills and reflecting the sunlight with my chipped magnifying glass, burning them until their little bodies went pop. Sometimes the heads survived. It was on a day like that, on my way back home, that I found a tiny discarded box at the park. 5 little matches were inside. I struck one, just like they do in the movies. The small tongue of the flame amused me. It was a nice, tingly feeling. I used 2 matches on 2 separate days that week, burning chunks of paper in the backyard. It helped me feel better when the days got hard, as though I were burning that day away. Good riddance. God knows I couldn't turn to my mother. Her thoughts were always somewhere else, a place where I didn't matter. Of course, when I used the last match on her new carpet, it caught her attention. She forced me to attend a treatment program for young fire starters. It didn't come home with me. It was 2, maybe 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when I cut across the vacant parking lot, every step as furtive as possible. I was 18 then. My eyes were locked on the target, a large industrial bin situated outside of a construction site. Impregnating its big red body was an overflow of trash that had accumulated over the week. Perfect, I'd thought, when I spotted it the night before. Simply perfect. Not far from home, not too close either. I ducked behind the bin. A deep exhale seeped out of my lungs. What a thrill! Like a buried seed deep inside myself, finally cracking open. For years I'd cultivated that seed. Even as a young boy, I'd burn broken toys or I'd toss firecrackers in mailboxes. Never once caught, mind you. The only good thing that came out of the middle school for me was learning how to make a flamethrower. All you needed was a can of aerosol spray and a lighter. A discovery that led to the permanent scar over my left eye and a lack of eyebrows. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Pulling a white container out of my jacket, I squeezed an arc of colorless liquid over the bin's contents. I circled the red rectangular body 4 times, soaking as much of the compacted waste as possible. Then the coup de grace. I pulled a box of matches from my jacket. Igniting one of them on the striker, I couldn't help but take a moment to appreciate it. How the small flames swayed and danced in the air. With a sharp flick of my finger, I tossed the flame into the marinated pile. There was a whoosh, followed by a burst of light. The fire erupted out of its throat in a borealis of orange and yellow. I was in awe, mentally fixated by the growing kindle, the deep crackling sounds, the new scents scarring the air. At that moment, I knew what true pleasure felt like. Unfortunately for me, the pleasure would be short-lived. While mesmerized by my creation, I'd failed to notice a different set of lights pulled up behind me. On the ground, hands where I could see 'em. 2 officers approached, their weapons drawn. I followed their orders. It was too late to run. My head was pressed firmly against the asphalt, my wrists choked with handcuffs. Still, I did not allow the dancing embers to leave my eyes. I was given 6 years, 4 in prison, and 2 on supervised license. My first cellmate was tall, bald, somewhere in his 30s, and missing an eye. The glass eye he once had was confiscated after he was caught trying to smuggle in illegal substances within the socket. He called it his secret pocket. It was evident that I had never done time before, and he took it upon himself to show me some tricks of the trade. Cellmates I would have down the road were never as eccentric, but thankfully not problematic. The doors unlocked every morning at 7:45. I was kept from kitchen duty, and only given tasks that it didn't include fire. Most of the time, laundry service or warehouse duty. The day-to-day jobs were menial and mundane, but better than sitting in a cell with a dullness gnawing at your skull. Nights were the most difficult. Sleep felt like it was an entirely different span of existence. I could only sit there, listening to the echoing footsteps, the awful snoring from the top bunk, and the hysterical wails from the psych units. But those weren't what kept my thoughts so active. It was the withdrawal. I'd have killed to see that blaze again, how it swelled like a fiery cloud, how it whipped tendrils of smoke into the air. Instead, I was trapped, shivering, and dribbling with sweat begging for that same release. On the day I was discharged, they sent me on my way with $75 in my pocket. The sky never looked so blue that day. Finding a job can be difficult for anyone, but for an ex-con, it was, close to impossible, unless you had connections. And give that ex-con dark skin, a scar above his eyes, and no left eyebrows. They may as well be hiring Freddy fucking Krueger. I answered countless ads, collected a heap of applications, and rewrote my resume dozens of times to make it look decent enough. But no amount of polish could soften the blow of the question. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Check no to be considered. Check yes to be tossed into the furnace. There was no deal breaker. Don't call us, we'll call you. Freedom is good, but it wasn't long before I realized that the sentence didn't end when the gates opened. Despite the stigmatized cross I was forced to bear, there were always silver linings. When your brain must adapt to years inside of a bared-up box, it finds any hopeful prospect to cling to. My mother had left me in her apartment and whining lemon of a car. Every room smelled like musty perfume fused with old candle wax. The bed was painfully hard and springy. The ever-building worry rolled around inside of me like a pocket of gas, trapped inside a piece of coal. Just one light, only one small piece of charred paper in the parking lot would be enough to get me through the week. Still, I resisted the urges. I'd successfully eluded it for years now, thanks to time and a lot of behavioral therapy. Whenever the seed started to burn, I knew how to extinguish the flare. Miraculously, I was able to land an interview. The hiring position was for a graveyard shift at Hitchhiker's Haven, a family-owned gas station run by a man named Bennett Crawford. I rehearsed the interview dozens of times, drawing up every possible question I'd be asked, and a golden answer to counter them. Hitchhiker's Haven sat along a rural stretch of road between Redmond and Sisters, the two closest towns for miles. Rolling green hills and farmland pastures surrounded it. The faded blue peaks of the Cascades were outlined in the distance like paintings. I met with Crawford, who insisted on being called Ben. The man was no grease monkey, which is what I had envisioned a gas station owner to be. His deep-set eyes were green and placid. The wide Cheshire grin he wore throughout the meeting didn't waver. "I'm sorry for this," Ben started, which made my heart begin to sink. "But I have to ask you, what landed you in the Iron Pen?" The question was inevitable, but still startling. I bit the inside of his cheek. "Third-degree arson, sir." Ben's genuine, beatific expression didn't fade. "Tried to burn your last boss's house to the ground, eh?" I rolled my shoulders back. "Oh, no, sir. I'd never do anything like that, but after what he said to me, I knew I could never work for him again." "What'd he say?" "You're fired." Ben suddenly looked surprised, then chuckled at my joke. "I'll give you a pass on that one. If there is one thing I respect in a man, it's a sense of humor." The interview shortly ended after that, and we both shook hands. "I like you, Noah. You have a nice light to you. Be it the demeanor you carry or that cheeky tongue of yours, I feel you'll be a good fit for us. So what do you say? You want the job?" I blinked, almost blurting out, "Abso-fucking-lutely," but instead settled on, "Yes, sir." Then came the question I had spent sleepless nights waiting for. "When can you start?" "The sooner the better, boss." My first night shift started that evening at 10. Outside, the metal canopy looming over the pumps bathed the lot in a fluorescent green glow. It was eerie, like a ghostly light guiding you from the dark stretch of road to an isolated gas station. Why Ben chose that color was beyond me. Not a very inviting glow for hitchhikers. I was given my uniform, a gray shirt-sleeve shirt with HH printed in bold, lining perfectly over the left tit. Each aisle was 4 feet wide, arranged in a grid formation across the interior. Not as big as the competitors, but just as convenient. Each of the multi-sided racks was stacked with assorted products, from chips and candy to on-the-road vehicle supplies and accessories. LED cooler doors lined the wall across from the register, filled with their assortment of drinks. A plastic mat rested on the counter, designed like a map of Deschutes County. Dominating the counter space was a box of jawbreakers, a small stand of keychains, and a rack of colorful lighters I knew I'd have to ignore. Ben's grand tour lasted 30 minutes. We went over the nightly responsibilities, operating the register, restocking shelves and coolers, replacing the bags in the outdoor ice machine, and managing a clean workspace. "So," Ben said, with a slanted look in his eye, "think you can manage something like this?" I gestured to my notes. "I'll be all right." "Good," he smiled, which quickly melted into a ruminating expression. "Given you history, I should hope you weren't one of the crazies." I raised a non-existent eyebrow. What do you mean?" "The workers I hire for the night shift are good most of the time, but once in a while you get one of the crazies. Honestly, you wouldn't believe some of the tales people try to sell me here. Either way, here's to hoping, son." His face held the vague nuance that there was more to say, but instead, he nodded goodbye and left for a good night's sleep. Hours into my shift, at roughly 3 a.m, a set of headlights slid off the road and into the lot. 4 young silhouettes sauntered inside. None of them could have been more than 17 or 18. One of the teens, a gauntly-looking one, who wore his hair like a young Kurt Cobain, led the quartet to the snack aisle. Periodically, a few of them erupted into a distinct high-pitched squeal of laughter, like a pack of hyenas. Each of them grabbed a stash of junk foods and formed a mountain on the counter. Cobain covered the bill, his pupils as big as hockey pucks. Something about his glazed, absent-minded expression filled me with bittersweet nostalgia. I thought about the old days when life felt so much larger than a box. Then I thought about the industrial bin and the beautiful fire spewing out of its melting gullet. Then I stopped myself. The other nights that week went as precisely as I pictured it, slow and dead. A few faces would occasionally pop in and out, but for the rest of the time, Hitchhiker's Haven was a ghost lot dipped in green. I didn't mind the boredom. The pay here was good, the confinement coldly familiar. I felt like a member of society again, like the word CONVICT was no longer seared onto my forehead. But night owl or not, the weight of deprivation fell heavily on me, which is what happens when one fucks with their circadian clock. To counteract the drowsiness, I often retraced all the items on my to-do list just to keep my mind and thoughts occupied. Clean. Check inventory stocks. Clean again. I scoured Outline for survival tips, ate healthier meals sometimes, and dubbed caffeine my new god. Then, during one of those nights, it started to rain. Despite the forecast never mentioning a late-night shower, nor there being a speck of humidity in the air, the rain thrummed harshly against the windows and spilled over the canopy in small waterfalls. The automatic doors slid open, and a person inched their way inside. They were wearing a faded blue jacket with the hood pulled down, and their hands shoved in their pockets. They walked with a stiff gait, squeaking their wet shoes along the tiles to the register. Beneath their hood, a white face stared at me, or rather, the suggestion of a face. A vague nose, no mouth whatsoever, and faint depressions where eyes should be. creepy, non-distinctive mask. Any minute now, I'm going to have a gun shoved in my face. Any minute now, I thought, unable to hide the apprehension in my face. The person raised one of their equally pale hands from their pockets, dropped change on the plastic mat, and reached for the box of jawbreakers. Their white, rigid fingers curved and almost seemed to lock as if they lifted it out by the plastic wrapper. The bundle of wet quarters and pennies had left me glinted from the overhead lights. The exact change for a jawbreaker. His candy in hand, he turned around and walked stiffly back to the door, retracing every waterprint. When the door slid closed behind him, his vague outline passed between the green-tinged pumps and sank into the night's dark pellicle. I let out an eased breath, thankful he hadn't whipped out a gun from his pocket and demanded everything from the register. But that didn't explain the mask. Why wear something like that if you weren't going to rob the place? As I sat there and pondered it, I'd realized then the rain had ceased. It wasn't difficult to get my bearings back for the rest of the shift. In prison, you saw all kinds of weird shit and the crazies to go along with it. Was this what Ben had warned me about? I shrugged at the thought. Every nocturnal job had its share of freaks waiting for the sun to go down. Why would a lonesome gas station be any different? Whatever the case, I was confident I could stomach what Hitchhiker's Haven threw me. I'd hope so, anyway. During another particularly dead hour with no customers, I busied myself with a second round of cleaning everything in sight. It was either that or watch the coffee dribble into the pot. I moved the plastic mat off the counter, realizing I had never cleaned the dust beneath it. Something was written into the countertop, carved by way of a knife into its surface. Don't talk to it. I ran a finger along the deep grooves of the message, or rather, the warning. A week of normality passed before the next downpour. I was ringing up a few items, Advil and 5-hour energy shots, for a red-eyed trucker. Together, we both heard the muffled applause of rain on the roof. Oh, shit. The man whined, crunching up his lip hair. You sell umbrellas, too? I shook my head, sorry. He huffed and eyed the watery skim that dribbled down the windows. Bullshit weather. You just can't predict them, can you? He took his things and beelined toward the semi, veering back to the dark stretch of road. Once he left, the doors glided open once again. A faded blue jacket stepped inside, the same man from before. He approached the front desk one firm step at a time. A pungent whiff of damp clothes wafted off him, soaking wet again from the rain. Echoing the first time his pale hand left his pocket and rested the wet change on the mat. Beneath his hood, the featureless face poked out, a sheen of light on his moist, non-existent expression. The same mask as before. Water dribbled off his fingers as he dropped the change, plucked out another jawbreaker, and returned to the exit, transparent footmarks trailing behind him. After that, the gray haze of boredom that once fogged the night shift was gone. Whether it was 1 week or every other week, the man always appeared. He'd saunter inside completely waterlogged, leave the exact change, take a jawbreaker, always a jawbreaker. The way he walked was especially strange to me, almost lifeless. Not in the undead sense, but more akin to a sleepwalker. As bizarre as it all was, the man wasn't especially difficult to deal with. Strange, yes, but not at all a hassle. In a minute, he'd walk in, and then back to the heavy rain, returning to God knows where. Congratulations, Ben, you found yourself a regular customer. In addition to the already weird repetition of it all, there was something else I couldn't explain. Moments before the man arrived, on the dot, it would always rain. No matter how bone-dry it was prior, the storm would come sudden and hard, only stopping after he left. sometimes in minutes, other times in 20. Too often for coincidence, but too crazily timed to be sane. Every so often, I'd lift the mat and stare at the words chiseled into the counter. Don't talk to it. Probably left by one of the last graveyard workers here. One of the crazies, as Ben put it. They were no doubt talking about Mr. No-Face, though calling him it seemed too dramatic. It must have really got to them. But a job was a job, and in my position, I was not apt for many preferences. I'd do what it takes to keep it. It wasn't long for the rain to come back harder than ever. The gas station's exterior moaned as the wind howled in an almost whisper through the slide doors. Without fail, the man walked in with his rigid gait, drenched. But when he reached the register, there was no change out of his pocket or jawbreaker picked out of the box. This time was different, astray from the usual routine. He balled his rigid white fingers into a tight fist and slammed it against the plastic mat. Bam! The force shook the counter's flat surface and vibrated the register. The countertop merchandise shivered in their displays. One of the keychains fell from their stand, a gray cat winking at me. Before I could react, the ashen-toned fist rose again and fiercely dropped. Bam! The stand-lighters toppled into the side of the counter, their transparent bodies scattering near my feet. Then, from the still plaster wall face, a hollow voice spoke out that left a sharp ringing in the air, as though it were made of glass. Would you like to see my face? What? The word blurted out of me, too late to reel back in. I was caught off guard, not expecting a question, let alone a sudden tantrum to come from him. At that moment, I'd broken the golden rule of Hitchhiker's Haven, carved gravely into its bedrock. The man stood there only a moment longer before the parts of his blank face began to move. His pale cheeks, the vague nose, both eye depression, extended outward, moving aside like an insect's plaited skin. Beneath them, a gaping space sank inward like a tunnel, its walls layered and glistening with a twitching blackish mold, a never-ending throat where white fragments of light pulsated like trapped stars. My eyes went vacant. I couldn't stop staring at them. A sense of distress raced down my spine. I could feel the cords of my neck straining to make me turn my head, but it wouldn't budge. The lights within its mildewy void gleamed in rich, beckoning textures. A universe of deep colors that wanted me, every thought, every particle of myself, and for a moment I felt myself starting to sink into its depths. But something kept me tethered, something starved and soaked in kerosene. I managed to tear my eyes away, grabbed a lighter and pulled a can of aerosol from one of the cabinets. Without thinking, I flicked on the small flame and pressed a finger on the can. A bright shed of orange reached out and fluttered over the cavernous pitch of its face. Whatever hellish material it was made out of caught immediately. Fire smothered its head and latched onto the faded jacket. It floundered backward, batting fruitlessly at the spreading flames. No screams came from it, but an awful, high-pitched ringing was stabbing my ears. Thunder bellowed outside in an ululating rumble. It toppled over one of the aisles, lighting up all the bags and products around. Acrid burning odors filled the air, and, admittedly, the hint of a smile crept up my lips. The rising smoke reached the fire sprinklers and set them off. Water ejected out of their flower-shaped heads and soaked the whole area. As the flames dampened, the blackened figure got back to its feet and hobbled through the exit. I moved to chase after it, but by the time I'd stepped out, it was gone, evaporating with the pouring rain. Try it as I have, there's no coming to terms with what transpired that night, or whatever demented thing I'd seen. It made my brain feel loose, slowly teetering between total numbness and a manic episode. Bennett Crawford did not believe me, nor did I expect him to, and did not hesitate to press charges for the damages. In the span of a single night, I joined the ranks of his book of crazies. Given my track record, I was labeled as a repeat offender, a new title for the pyromaniac. The hearing will be sometime next week, and until then, I can only wait until the gavel comes down. I still dream about those colors sometime, like they're still imprinted somewhere in my consciousness, beckoning for me to go back there. Whatever it is they wanted from me, they are still calling. Will the next person Ben hires see the man with no face? Or will it bide its time, waiting for the right stiff to pop the question to, "Would you like to see my face?" Yes, show me your face, show me those colors, so that I can burn them all again. Hitchhiker's Haven will go up in smoke when I'm through with it. Then where will you go? Wherever it is, I'm sure it'll be raining. Today's episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark is proudly brought to you by Shudder, premium video service brought to you by AMC Networks, offering an unbeatable selection of expertly curated and unique collections of horror, supernatural, and thrillers, uncut and commercial-free, with exclusive and original titles you won't find anywhere else. And as a listener of this program, you can start your free trial today risk-free. What makes it even better is you get unlimited access to stream ad-free on iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, Xbox One, Amazon Fire TV, Google Chromecast, Roku, and Android devices. For just $5.99 per month or $56.99 per year with Shudder, you'll be able to stream great thrillers, horror and suspense movies, television series, documentaries, and more, 24/7, anywhere you go. Think of it as the Netflix for horror. And the best part is, there are new spine-tingling thrillers, shocking horrors, and edge-of-your-seat suspense added weekly. Over the next month, I'm ensuring my insomnia by checking out the new content, offerings such as Veritoka, directed by Glenn Danzig, also with Misfits. That'll be September 24th. Scare Me, starring Josh Rubin, Aya Cash, and Chris Redd. That's coming October 1st. And on October 8th, The Cleansing Hour. And later in the month, May the Devil Take You To, October 29th. And in case you missed it and you're a fan of Nicolas Cage, like I am, there's Color Out of Space, which debuted September 1st. Get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes titles like the acclaimed Tigers Are Not Afraid, One Cut of the Dead, Revenge, and the Creepshow TV series, produced by Greg Nicotero, and based on the famous films by George Romero. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to Shudder.com and use promo code TOLD. Once again, that's Shudder, spelled SHUDDER.com, and use promo code TOLD, spelled TOLD, to start your free trial now and let them know that Otis sent you. And as always, thanks so much for your support of this show and our sponsors who help make my program possible. I hope you enjoyed Hitchhiker's Haven, as written by Michael Paige and performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that first story, you can help support our featured author and get in contact with him by visiting his official blog at michaelpageblog.wordpress.com. Page is spelled Paige. Again, that's michaelpageblog.wordpress.com to get in touch and get all of Michael's latest updates and new releases. You can also follow him on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, and Reddit, links to which are all available on his blog. From Michael and all of us here at Scary Stories Told in the Dark, thanks again for your support of this show and of tonight's featured author. Up next, we've got a second tale of terror for you, courtesy again of Michael Paige. In it, a single mother is thrilled when her son makes friends with another boy. Things go south, however, once she's presented with evidence that there's more to her child's newfound pal than meets the eye. Now, you'll have to suspend your disbelief in this next tale, more so than usual, as I'll be reading from the perspective of a woman. So, I'd like to apologize in advance if you can't get the idea of a gender-swapped Otis Jiry out of your head during this next one. But Michael's tale was simply too good to pass up, and I hope you enjoy every bit as much as I did. Without further ado, I present to you those deep, dark wells. The terrible thing happened at night, as most terrible things do. While I clicked away at my home job as a transcriptionist, I'd often watch the boys playing in the backyard. They'd be at it for hours, acting out some scene with foam swords and plastic guns, only stopping when the sun left to rise elsewhere. Seeing Mason happy made me happy. He'd finally found a friend. His father left us when he was 6 months old and, more or less, held no role in his life. Sure, there were the occasional visits every few years, but even those were short and feigned, not even so much as an annual birthday card. Perhaps that was why Mason anchored himself such a secure distance from other kids, a point driven home by his fifth-grade teacher and several others. Part of me didn't blame him. Kids in school, especially the ones I can recall, weren't the friendliest bunch. If you were lucky, you could pick out the sharks from the minnows and avoid them, but honestly, they all looked the same, twined together in the same concrete box. Please give him a best friend, I'd whisper at my bedside every night, sending out the same message to God, or at least to something just as benevolent, to hear my prayer. Give my son his first best friend. Then, one day, much to my wonderment, Mason brought Todd home for a play date. He was a petite boy with mismatched clothes, unkempt hair, and the bluest eyes you'd ever seen. I was ecstatic, relieved that my son had finally cracked open his shell and found a buddy. I saw him at the park, Mason told me when I asked how they met. He was sitting alone at the swings like he was sad. When he saw me on my bike, he waved, and I waved back. Then we hung out, and it was really cool. As he shared this, I couldn't help but smile at his excitement, so much deserved by the loneliest boy in the world. That night they had a sleepover and passed out in the living room. From my bedroom I could hear the muffled speech of our television, which they had left on. Sighing, I tucked myself out of bed and walked sluggishly down the stairs to them. Light from the screen pulsed and stretched over the sleeping boys. Mason was swaddled in his blanket on the floor, while Todd was curled up on the couch. I scanned for the remote, and after no luck, I moved to shut it off myself. Quick! A lone bag of chips crinkled under my foot. From the couch, Todd's shape twitched and then bolted upright. I meant to say, sorry, but I was stopped short. When Todd jutted awake and opened his eyes, I couldn't see them. They hadn't rolled up in their sockets or slipped to their sides. They were simply gone. 2 holes of singular darkness. Todd had blue eyes, vividly blue eyes, but that instant, not even the glow of the television reflected off those dark membranes, black as Santa's coal. Then he blinked, and the eyes returned. Before I could say anything, his mouth stretched into a yawn, and his body slumped back into the cushions. I was stiff as a board, somewhat relieved I hadn't shrieked and woken them both up. My thoughts told me it was a trick of the light, as did any speck of reason. Vision played games with you that way. I switched off the television and went back to bed. A few weeks later, on an especially windy evening, a knock came at the door. Todd was there as usual, seesawing on his soles patiently. "Hi there," I smiled. "Hi," he smiled, his thin neck cocked. "Can Mason come out and play?" Before I even had to answer, Mason had already squeezed past me, still working one of his arms through the jacket sleeve. "Bye, Mom." I watched as they disappeared down the street. The rule was to be back before dark, and to their credit, the boys always returned just as the sky started to dim. On that particular outing, they came home with some cool rocks they'd found and dirt-clotted sneakers. By the time Todd was ready to walk back home, it had fallen too dark for him to go alone. I gave him a ride with both boys in the back seat. It wasn't a far drive, as his house was only a few streets away. Every so often, my eyes would slip back to the rear view and see Todd watching the street, Mason dozing off next to him. As we passed underneath the street lamps, a blur of light would creep through the window, roll over his face, and vanish over his head. The car suddenly rocked as my wheels rolled too hastily over a speed hump. His gaze left the window and met mine. Only this time, as the slanted light skimmed over his features, blue eyes did not look back at me. They were gone, blotted out by the same oily darkness. Silent, murky circles. Even his skin, in just that quick moment, looked different, like dry, modded clay fit poorly over his skull. Lips bloodlessly shriveled. I slammed on the brake, jostling all of us with a sudden lurch. Mason gasped himself into wide-eyed awareness. As fast as it happened before, the straight-faced horror in my back seat returned to a sweet young boy, shocked and surprised. Sorry, I breathed. "Sorry about that, guys. I thought I saw a cat in the road." We reached Todd's house, a white ranch style with a flowering dogwood tree in the front yard. As the boys said their goodbyes, I could only stare at the dashboard, my heart sending tremors down my arms. The world felt off its tilt, as if the lines separating actuality and nonsense were blurred. I was disoriented by how real it seemed. His eyes, like deep dark wells, his unhealthy skin stretched and pulled like a death mask. My thoughts clashed with the fold of my brain that formed logic, and eventually logic won. It was all in my head, period. But despite how far-fetched it sounded, I actively avoided eye contact with Todd, not even giving a sliver of opportunity for that oily pitch to return. If it ever happened in passing glance or a quick double-take, I'd be back to circling the rim of a mental collapse. A week later, I went to pick up Mason from Todd's house. I pulled up along the curb, texted, "I'm here," and waited there for some time. There was no sign he'd read my message, nor did he answer any of my calls. When I got tired of waiting, I twisted the keys out of the ignition and made my way up the slim walkway. The house was missing a great deal of shingles, which scarred its roofline in dark patches. The rain gutters were clogged and stunk of decomposing leaves. I knocked briskly and waited. The door, unlocked, held only partially open by a door chain. "Yes?" the face, peeking out, asked. His voice was nasally, like it was lodged somewhere in his throat, right in the pit of it. Hi, I'm Holly, Mason's mom, here to pick him up." The door closed and then opened fully as the chain slid out of its holder. The man on the other end was lanky, with onset baldness widening his forehead, his eyes tired and heavy. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, flashing his thin-lipped smile and offering a handshake. "David." The boys are probably still on their way back, but they'll be here any minute now. "You can come inside and wait if you like. I've got some tea ready to go." I took him up on the offer and followed him inside. At our immediate right was the living area, where a woman sat watching a rom-com on the television. Paying no mind to the sound of the door, she kept her back to us. Beneath the show's timed laugh track, I could hear the sound of hard, labored breathing. Hanging over the side of the sofa drooped a thin, skeletal wrist. On the wall, a gray Kit Kat clock shifted its eyes and wagged its tail. The kitchen was small, with a triangular arrangement of sink, stove, and refrigerator, a small dance between the three. Flowery wallpaper looped around the room. A formica-topped table sat against the wall with minty green chairs. I took a seat in one as David retrieved some cups from the cabinet. The smell of light orchid drifted through the air. "Hope you like green tea," he said quietly, as he filled the cups and brought them over. "Green's fine," I replied, taking the cup from him. "Thank you." He planted himself in a chair. "They're really fond of each other, aren't they? The boys, I mean." "I'd say so. You can hardly keep Mason away." I laughed. By this point, I'd noticed the dark pouches beneath his eyes more clearly. In fact, his overall appearance seemed to hang in a mournful sag. Whatever supplement he needed, he was missing a lot of it. "So, how long have you been in the neighborhood?" I asked for the sake of conversation. "Oh, good while now," he mused, rubbing a finger along his cup. "Really? I'm surprised Mason didn't meet Todd sooner. Our houses aren't that far from each other." "Todd?" he asked, as though needing a moment to remember his own son's name. "Oh, yes, that is pretty surprising. He gets around. Mason never sees him at school. Does he go to a different district?" Lines creased his mouth. "School, well, From the living room, a harsh, guttural coughing reached us. David's neck swiveled toward the sound. "Excuse me, my wife needs me." He left his chair and hastily went to her. Not too long after that, the front door opened as Todd and Mason arrived. As we said our goodbyes to David and his silent wife, he clasped my hand in a tight shake. "It was nice meeting you, Holly. Really, it was." When he released the grip, I realized something was left in my palm. When we were back in the car, I folded it open. "What's that, Mom?" Mason asked. "Nothing, sweetie." I smiled back at him, placing a crumpled note in my lap, a phone number, a time to call, and the word "help" scribbled into its loose leaf. It was nightfall when I unfurled and read it again. I was in the backyard occupying a seat at our fire pit, my cell phone in one hand and a cigarette pinched in the other. The note said to call at 8, which was only 5 minutes away. As the time drew clearer, my chest grew tighter with anxiousness. Moments ago, I'd snuck into my own room, pulled out the bottom shelf of my dresser, and unearthed the pack of Marlboros hidden there. 3 years I'd been without them. In 3 years, I'd kept my promise to Mason to stop smelling like an ashtray. But tonight, shamefully, they were the only thing holding me together. When the clock on my phone pulsed 8, I took a long drag on the cigarette and then dialed the number. The tone churred in and out a few times and finally connected. "Hello?" David's voice chattered on the other end. "Who is this right now?" My heart rattled in my throat. "It's Holly, Mason's mom." The voice exhaled and then returned briskly. "I need you to listen to me, okay? Are you listening?" "Yes, I'm listening." "Keep it away from your boy." The fire pit popped and spat a few embers. "Keep what away? What are you talking about?" Listen, he snapped, a manic weight to his words. Don't let Mason come over here anymore. It isn't safe for him. Don't even let it go over there. You have to stop this now. I twisted my neck back toward the house and leaned forward in my chair. Are you talking about your son right now? Isn't my son, he scorned. Not at all. Not in any way. You need to calm down. If you need help, I can call the police. No police, he screamed, his voice so tight and stressed that it splintered on the other end. It will take more from her if you do that. My wife, she can't handle much more. It's taking something from her, taking something from me. We can't get rid of it now. It's too late for us, but not for you. You can stop this. He started to weep and mutter to himself. He came to our door to use the phone. Why did we let it in? Why did we let it use the fucking phone? Something stirred in his background. He paused and then whispered, Keep it away from him. And then he hung up. I'm not sure how long I sat out there, but it was long enough for the flames to shrink into powdery mounds. When I entered the house again, Mason was on the couch with his tablet. You smell weird, he said, taking note of me. The fire pit, I lied. My thoughts too heavy to muster anything else. He flashed me a big smile and tactfully asked, Can I have a sleepover at Todd's this weekend? No, I answered stiffly. That isn't going to work. Why not? He persisted. Todd always sleeps over here. Why can't we do his? Because, Mason, I said no. End of story. He shot an icy look of defiance at me. Fine. Then we'll sleep over here then. No, he won't. We're going to take a break from Todd for a while. His jaw opened, flabbergasted. You can't do that. I just did, I said, perhaps a little too matter-of-factly. As I walked back up the stairs, I could feel the burn of his eyes, watching me on every step. Both of our nights now ruined. David's deranged garble on the phone sat with me for the rest of the night. I had no idea what to do, what to fix, what to think. Keep it away isn't safe for him. The message, so vague but also desperately clear. I had to keep Mason safe. That was all that mattered. The next day, after Mason was back from school, I sat him down on the couch. I'm sorry for last night, I said. I was very stressed, but that is not the way I want us to speak to each other again, okay? His eyes naturally scanned the floor. Okay. I love you, Mason, and no matter what, I want you to be safe, so there are a few things I need to know about Todd. Will you do that for me? He nodded again, his sneakers softly kicking the backpack slumped on the carpet. Did he ever act weird or strange to you? His head shook. What about his parents? Did he act different around them at all? Same answer. I wasn't sure how to word the next question, but I did my best anyway. Did he ever do something with his eyes? This time Todd nodded. My heart squeezed itself smaller. I wanted so much to change the subject, to retreat to the kind of cadence of sanity. But I had to know more. I had to protect my son. What did he do with his eyes? A trick, Mason replied hesitantly. Told me not to tell anyone, though. You have to tell me. His lips crinkled, trying to keep the secret zipped up. Then he finally spoke. He could make them disappear. I felt drugged by his words. My head, even feeling lighter, like all the logic in the world had just been raptured away. You did see them, my thoughts repeated. You did see the deep, dark wells. As quickly as all my self-doubt left, a scream of dread filled the empty spaces. Did it scare you? I asked. A little. Mason replied absently. He said not to be, though, that he'd show me how to do it. I grabbed his shoulder, making him jump suddenly. He didn't, though, right? He didn't do anything to you. He looked confused, like I was the one talking crazy now. No. I know he's your friend, Mason, but I need you to promise that you won't see him anymore. Mason's gaze flicked back to mine, his eyes wide with betrayal. But he's my friend. The tears began to come down. Promise me, I repeated, the words like razors scraping down my tongue. I don't want to. Mason. After much hesitation, he tearfully replied, I promise. I hugged him, closed my eyes, and surrendered to the cruelty of it all. For the rest of that hellish week, I kept my ears tuned for the knock at the door. For whatever reason, Todd never used the doorbell. Inevitably, the knock came. Behind the frosted glass of our front door, I could see Todd's vague shape, teetering on his soles. When the door opened, he smiled up at me. Hi, can Mason come out and play? Sorry, dear, I smiled back. Mason can't play today. The corner of his mouth lifted as his neck cocked to the side. Can he later? No, I don't think so. Sorry. His nose wrinkled and the skin between his eyebrows creased. Okay. I closed the door, watched him leave, and that was that. It might take a few times, but eventually the message would sink in. Leave my son alone. I felt a sense of pride behind that, and what could possibly better protect a boy than his mother? But when I turned and saw Mason's cold eyes from the stairs, the pride all but evaporated. When Todd returned the next day, I gave him the same answer. Then the day after that, and the one after that. I couldn't even refuse to answer when he knocked. Otherwise, he'd sit there and wait, knock again, and wait some more, knowing full well we were home. 4 straight evenings of it. And poor Mason, he had every right to despise me for this. No parent could want to wall themselves between their son and their best friend, his first friend. But what choice did I have? We were drifting apart, orbiting ever farther away from one another. He was my prisoner, and I was the judge, sentencing him to a lonely world. Surely he'd make new friends, right? The world was full of them, and if anything, this was proof that he could find them. That thought helped me cope, anyway. When the knock came for the 5th time in a row, my tolerance had run out. Todd wasn't catching on, and to make matters more irritating, it was 8 or so at night this time. Part of me hoped it was someone else, maybe a neighbor bringing a package by that was wrongfully left on their doorstep. But I knew better than that, and I was not allowing this to go any further. Mason was doing his homework at the kitchen table when I passed by him, no acknowledgement whatsoever. When I pulled the door open, Todd was standing beneath our porch light, both shoulders hunched over his ears as though expecting me to smack him, and perhaps verbally that's what I did. Go home, I said assertively. We're done. No more of this, all right? Can Mason come out to play? He asked sorrowfully, as though it weren't even after dark. No, Todd, he can't, and he won't next day or the next. Now go home and stay there. His small arm rubbed his sleeve nervously. It's really dark. I don't want to walk home alone. Can I use your phone to call my parents? I felt absolutely cruel, but I also knew the game he was trying to play. You walked here on your own. You can walk on your own back. Then, as I moved to close the door and end the conversation, Todd made his eyes disappear. The darkness washed over them quickly and seemed actually to curdle in his sockets. A thickening, horrible texture. His face became milk wax, the sad child disappearing behind it. Beads of, perhaps, sweat dripped from his temples. One ran into his eye and vanished into the void. I want to come inside, he spoke, the sorrowful note in his voice also gone. My heart slackened to a deep, slow throb. I felt the need to pinch my side, to tweak it hard enough to draw blood and wake from this moment. Between the dead, shriveled lips, I could see the decayed tips of black teeth. "Can I please come inside?" he asked. "No," I said, semi-reactively. His black, craving eyes narrowed at me. For a moment I actually thought they started to cry, but it was the darkness dribbling down his cheeks, oozing like oil slicks. "I just want to play with Mason." The sound of it, the sound of that horrible face, saying my son's name, snapped me out of the shock. I slammed the door closed and quickly locked it. Mason stood stiffly in the kitchen. His expression was only a shimmer of consciousness, vacant as a sleepwalker. "Mason, look at me, honey. It's all okay. Everything's going to be okay." But his unfocused eyes were not facing me. 3 firm knocks came from the door. When I turned to face it, a dark shape lingered behind the frosted glass. A tall figure, taller than any adult, was hunching to look inside, and from behind the single pane that separated us, its vague shape didn't move. From the other side, Todd's childish voice was still calling. "Can I please come inside? Don't you want to play, Mason? Don't you want to play?" I could feel it watching us, like static vibrating the air. When I tried to move Mason, he refused to budge, staring emptily toward the evil thing behind the glass. Heavy as he was, I scooped him up in my arms and bolted for the stairs. "It won't break in," my thoughts uttered. "It isn't allowed to." That much I was sure of. If it wanted to get in, it would have by now. It needed to be invited. I shut both of us away in the bathroom upstairs, and when the sounds of the front door finally ceased, Mason snapped out of it. He was confused, like he'd just missed everything that transpired. I wasn't sure whether to consider that a blessing or not. Perhaps it was, and perhaps, also, it was not God that answered my prayer. It was impossible to digest what happened that night. Sometimes I'd linger on the stairs, right on the top step, and watch the doorway, wondering if the glass would suddenly darken, if Todd's voice would slip through and ask to come inside. One night, David left a voicemail on my phone. "She's gone," his voice whimpered. "It got what it wanted from her. Drained her dry. Now my wife won't wake up, and it's left us. I don't know what it wants from your boy, but it wants something. No matter what, don't let it back inside." The message cut out after that, and he still won't answer my calls. Todd never did come back, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Strangely enough, the one least affected by all this was Mason. I was worried to see him fall back into that distant bubble, but that isn't what happened. He started to make friends with other kids around the neighborhood. New friends, normal friends. He'd become a real social butterfly, and despite my brain ripping itself apart to understand what I had seen, I at least had that comfort to cling to. Seeing Mason happy made me happy. Lately, though, I've been feeling strange. It's been harder to feel motivated about things, let alone get out of bed in the morning. Even my appetite has started to dwindle. Day by day, I've been growing increasingly sapped and lethargic. I don't know what's wrong, but it's getting worse. Mason's been helping me get around the house, even going out of his way to play chef and make me things to eat. He's a good boy. But sometimes, dear Lord, I catch something in his eyes, something that shouldn't be there. But it's only a trick of the light, please, God. Let it only be a trick of the light. I hope you enjoyed those deep dark wells by author Michael Paige, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoy the tales you've heard tonight, I'd like to remind you one last time that tonight's featured author has an official blog and is active on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Tumblr. To get in touch with him or to see his latest releases and updates, simply visit michaelpaigeblog.wordpress.com. Again, the author's last name is spelled Paige. Michael's got a book in the works, and you'll find all the latest news about it on the site. So check it out today, and keep an eye on this talented gentleman so you don't miss that. Thanks again for your support of tonight's featured author. I'd also like to take a moment to express how much I appreciate your joining me for today's episode of this program. It means a lot to me and to everyone involved. Thank you. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcast and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring Twice the Terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs. Or become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky and get some sleep if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling tales for dark nights.